We're here to talk about mindfulness, healing, and resilience.
Yeah.
And I think the challenge I found as I kind of prepared for this interview was you have so much to say. And you've studied this so in-depthly. And so I'm a little bit challenged, like knowing even where to begin. And I guess for me, what strikes me the most is that people might look at you and be like, oh, well, she got lucky.
Yeah.
You know, some right people showed up at the right time. And I think from your perspective, if I'm right, it's like there's this great Taoist quote that says, chance favors a prepared mind.
Mm.
And that we can't control life, but we can set conditions that lead to certain possibilities. And that you, through facing various trauma and struggles and enormous hardship, set your mind towards possibilities that then allowed your life to unfold in a different way, in a more healing way, than in a way that could feel like you were continuing the trauma that you had also experienced back into the world. So I think that's just such a beautiful thing, and I think we're all in that path to some degree. We're all looking for that right mindset and that right approach that allows us to understand our own healing and to bring something out in the world that is different than maybe, I mean, we've all experienced beautiful things and hardships, so it's like helping to heal those hardships. And so I feel like, what are the things that you feel like are the practical steps that you've learned from your life exploring the impact of trauma and how to heal from that? Very long question. I figure you can take that as you wish.
Sure. It's funny, I was raised singing on stage, and so you would have thought at some point in my life it would have dawned on me I'd become a professional musician, but it actually didn't. I was very obsessed from a young age with how to handle the anxiety and the pain that I was in a way that was meaningful, that wouldn't end me in early life. Because I was raised in bar rooms, I was watching people in so much pain, using alcohol and drugs. I watched that women would compromise themselves for just a compliment in these bar rooms. And just the depth of human need for human connection and the misguided ways that people tried to find a way to connect. Being raised in bar rooms, you know, it's a very vulnerable thing as a young child. My dad was often not watching or paying attention during the breaks. There's a lot of predators around, a lot of drunk men. And I realized quickly that my emotions were my best alarm system. You know, we have this brain in this dark box, and it doesn't actually see the world. It perceives the world through these eyes, which still boggles me. Our emotions are our best alarm system. They let me know when I'm safe. And if I turned off my pain, I actually had to numb every other single emotion that I had. And that was excruciating to me, because being awake and alive in your body and feeling joy and seeing the sunrise is beautiful. And when you numb pain, you numb every other quality in your life. And so making that decision to try and stay awake was kind of the beginning of my mindfulness practice of how do I stay awake in the face of great pain. And so it's interesting, you know, when I moved out at 15, I thought, hey, I can avoid becoming a statistic if I'm very clever and if I use my intellect and I approach my life scientifically and I look at the emotional patterns I was raised with and I identify them. I wrote them all down. It was my emotional English that I wrote down of how my family handled and taught and passed on emotional languages. And then I wrote down what kind of emotional English I hoped to learn, and I began to look in my community for people that had those types of traits or tools, and I began to mentor myself with them. Often they didn't know they were mentoring me. I would just sort of stand awkwardly close to people and overhear conversations, or just tear up watching a father interact with his daughter, and I acted like I was the daughter, and I acted like that I received that love. And I did things to sort of intuitively find my way into healing, and I didn't quite get it. You know, I was on a decent track, you know, for a 15-year-old supporting herself, I guess. But I went about my life thinking if I'm hyper-vigilant, I can avoid the pitfalls and pain in life. I avoided a few. You know, I didn't become a drug addict or a stripper, which is, you know, pretty much success for where I came from. But I met so much pain in my life. You know, just from being homeless. I realized at 33 that I was broke. I realized my mother, who was my manager, wasn't who I thought she was. I realized almost everything I'd been told about my childhood was a lie in my 30s. I realized I had been programmed and conditioned in ways that I hadn't even comprehended. And this was when I was an adult that I realized these things. And recovering from that was really shocking. And as I was looking at it in my 40s, I kind of went from trauma to trauma to trauma. I experienced a lot of abuse as a child. The trauma of moving out as a 15-year-old is incredibly anxiety-ridden. Getting yourself through school, trying to pay your bills and get food while you're in high school and work jobs while you're in high school, and then just, I can't even tell you, it was just trauma to trauma to trauma. And then getting discovered was such a blessing. But I had to be so on my toes so that I didn't fail, because fame is just this path people lose their footing on, and you lose a sense of your authenticity. And I wanted to fight for my humanity. If I could sum up my whole life, it's like, how can I fight for my humanity? Where I don't become a bitter person, a broken person, a damaged person. How do I become a more loving, more kind, more resilient person? And as I studied the people around me, and I lived in so many places, I had these incarnations of lifetimes within one life that it's almost schizophrenic, but I was living in the projects in Anchorage for a while with my mom. We were one of the only white families in this area, and my mom was very absent. And so you form your tribe, you form your community, your gang that you hang out with. And we were doing things we shouldn't, like stealing cars and things like that. And I looked at my friends, and I looked at that need for connection and that need for safety, and how we found safety in our group of friends, and how when one of our friends got beat up, we'd cover for them at school so that the social services didn't go to their house and take them away from their families. I mean, hard issues that kids deal with. And I looked at people start to check out and say they couldn't take it, they couldn't handle the pain, and they had no resource. And I kept writing, thank heavens, and it kept leading me to myself and to this deep well that was in myself, and to being able to not disassociate in an unhealthy way, but just to detach from my mind, to get a brain break, to realize I wasn't my mind, I wasn't my thoughts, there was more in me. The deeper I dug into this river of myself, the more I was able to see the ocean of everybody else. And it can seem like a very selfish act to spend a lot of time looking inward, but it's the most giving act that you can possibly do, because it's the only way you become available. The world doesn't need evangelists as much as they need people to live an authentic life. And when we live an authentic life, oh, well, thank you. When we live our authentic life, we just become the change that other people need to see. We become the permission other people need to see. It's not, I've never considered it my job to tell somebody else what they need in their life. I believe we each have a medicine cabinet inside ourselves. We each have the resources we need to heal and to grow and to change. We just need to get rid of some of the static that keeps us from being able to have our own biofeedback system, that keeps us from being able to hear ourselves and our own wisdom and our own intuition. We don't need gurus in the world. We need to understand that we have our answers if we can look inward and if we can be less afraid. And so for me, a lot of the tools that I developed in my life were learning how to get rid of the static. What is causing static where I can't trust my instincts, where I can't hear my own inner voice, where I can't trust my own inner knowing? And I went through so many incarnations of static, I can't even tell you. But that really has been sort of what my journey has been about. And I kept trying to find and develop tools along the way. All of them were geared around what now today is called mindfulness. Those words weren't around then. But very practical, simple tools to try and help me get a brain break and to help me tap into a deeper sense of intelligence, this greater sense of knowing that always helped my body feel calm and less anxious. And so I started to live my life saying, if this makes me feel more anxious, it's a lie. That's not my thought. It's not actually me. If this thought, this feeling, this truth helps me feel less anxious and more calm in my body, that's the truth. That's my soul talking to me. And staying in your body when you're in trauma is very difficult. You know, getting a child who's scared and in trauma to stay in their body and to teach them it's safe in their body and to start feeling when they feel calm in a room and when they feel anxious in a room You know, there were times in my life where I literally would go, I was in a movie theater and I'm watching a movie and I'm suddenly overcome with anxiety. What was I just thinking? My mind must have drifted somewhere, tracing my thoughts back, pinpointing that thought and going, oh, that's a lie. And then I started a practice called my antidote thought, which is something I teach on my website, where I would write down that lie and I'd go, it's a lie. What is the antidote? What is the truth? What is that medicine that I need to hear? So a lie, for instance, that plagued me a lot of my life is I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm a kid. I don't know what I'm doing. And it would paralyze me. And so I'd write down the antidote. Often to find my antidote, I just started with the opposite. So the opposite of the lie is I know what I'm doing. That didn't actually feel like the truth. It didn't resonate in my body and make my body feel calm. So I kept finding versions of writing the truth until it was my actual soul's truth, which was I can figure it out. I'm capable of figuring it out. I'm tenacious. I will keep trying, and I'm capable of trying. That felt like the truth. So that became my antidote thought to the lie of I don't know what I'm doing. And so I began to able to fine-tune. When I started to feel anxious, I'd go, which lie is it? My brain's telling me. And what is the truth? And I would just start to make a mantra out of my real truth, if it meant writing it down. Sometimes I couldn't even remember my truth. I had to keep it in my pocket and take it out and go, okay, I'm capable of learning what I'm doing. Like, okay. And I'd put it back in my pocket. And I began to tackle the lies in my head and learned how to distance myself from my thoughts, and learn how to trust and rely on myself. And every time I tried to put my compass in someone else, I love teachers. I have had so many teachers in my life. I've read amazing books. I've had amazing people show up for me in my life. But every time I gave my compass and my sense of knowing and I put it into another individual, my life tanked. And I'm not talking small tanking. I'm talking massive loss of massive amounts of money, massive tanking. It was a very visual, okay, I can clearly see that when I place my inner sense of knowing in somebody else, my life crashes. I have to keep my compass in myself. And it's something I tell my son now. He's 5. I go, life is a forest, and what is your compass? And it's your values. And so I began developing tools for myself in my life. Another of them was this idea of hardwood grows slowly. There is no shortcut to a great peace of mind. Hardwood trees grow slowly. They have a beautiful shape. They're resilient. They don't blow over in storms. Softwood trees grow very quickly and they fall right over. I wanted to be a hardwood tree. And so what did that mean for me? And so I remember drawing out this tree and going, okay, my root system are my values. What are my values? What kind of person? And I would do my deathbed exercise where I would pretend I was my deathbed as a 15-year-old. Look back on my life and go, who is that woman that's dying and looking back on her life, and what is she proud of, and who does she want to be, and who is that woman? And I wrote down adjectives to describe her, and I realized those were my values. And so I started doing an audit every day because I knew that if I acted every day in accordance to those values, I was guaranteed to have this compass, this true north that I was following, so that at the end of my life, I would be the person I wanted to be. Because our lives are so busy and we get so distracted and there's so many things that we're dealing with, that I found this self-audit at night or once a week really, really helpful. And now with a 5-year-old, being able to say, life is a forest, what is your compass? And he says, my values. And I say, what are your values? And he's come up with his own little set of values, and they kind of change and they grow. And we kind of go through every day without shame, because if you shame yourself, you don't actually get to see yourself. There has to be enough emotional, internal safety and internal permission to go, oh yeah, I didn't live my value when I did this, and I can do that better tomorrow. Like what you gentlemen said about, I'm forgetting the word you used. It was what was it?
Respect.
What is it?
Respect.
Respect, yeah. Look at yourself. It's basically that. The ability to create enough safety inside yourself to re-examine and redirect and recourse every day, and the willingness to do that. Very long-winded answer to a long question. But the point I wanted to come back around to is this idea I had that if I was hyper-vigilant, put me in my head as a 15-year-old. I wanted to avoid pain. I wanted to avoid becoming a statistic. What I realized as a 40-year-old woman that was writing her memoir, going through a divorce, was that it wasn't actually my hypervigilance that kept me safe. That actually was quite a deterrent. It kept me in my head a little bit more than I should have been. It kept me in a lot of anxiety, trying to predict the future. Fear is a thief, and it takes the past and it projects it into the future, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it robs you of the only opportunity you have to create meaningful change, which is right now. And if you can't show up right now, nothing's going to change in your life. And so what mindfulness is, what meditation is, what being present is, what paying attention is the ability to step into the moment right now in real time and have a real influence on your life. And I realized the thing that kept me safe wasn't my hypervigilance. Looking back on my life, what kept me safe was my willingness to transmute pain into beauty. The willingness to say, pain is unavoidable. None of us get out of here without it. It's not the point of life. The point of life isn't to avoid pain. It's a waste of your energy. It's a waste of your time. The point of life is to transmute pain into beauty so that we can be truly resilient. And what is true resilience?
Beautiful. Wow. So you've studied a lot about how to actually transmute pain and make that something that turns into beauty. And I'm wondering if you can say a little bit more about what that process is for you. So when there's a hurt or somebody says something hurtful to you now, or your son screams at you and tells you you're the worst mom ever, or if he hasn't
done it yet, but I'm sure it'll happen.
It might come at some point. And so in those moments of hurt, what is your particular process that you feel is helpful to you to honor that hurt and also have a different expression? Or is it more organic and hard to describe?
I like being hard to offend. I'm a very flawed person. I'll lead with that. That was one of my biggest concerns when I got signed to a record label was a lot of people use art as propaganda to make themselves seem more perfect than they are because they're afraid to show that they're imperfect. Thankfully, I learned while I was homeless that my imperfection was my source of safety. Being vulnerable and getting rid of my armor made me stronger and made me more safe because armor drowns you at the end of the day. You just die under the weight of your own armor. And so I was able to begin my career with this idea that the more vulnerable I am, the safer I am. The more honest I am, the safer I am. And the more I look at myself, the more uncomfortable I am. I love that. Because it means something's up. It's like a little neon sign, and if we can just rewire our brains to go, if I'm offended, yay. What's going on with me? What part of me is offended? It's a little neon sign, and we have these neon signs that are built into us that become these flashing light bulbs going, look here, I need healing, look here. And so I've just learned that when I'm uncomfortable, when I'm in pain, when I'm offended, when I have a really strong reaction, when I want to bow up, I get really extra curious. And curiosity is just a very beautiful tool because it disarms everything. It's not having judgment. It's not blaming yourself. It's not blaming the other person. It's just putting a little bit of distance between you and your brain in real time and going, that's interesting. There's a neon sign telling me to look here, look here. And so I began to see it as a positive, not a negative. I also grew up in nature and watching the rhythm of nature. The tide comes in, the tide goes out. The storms come through, the storm passes. You know, the job of a tree, again, as I look at this analogy of hardwood trees, if the tree was to grab onto every bit of weather, it would pull the tree down. So our job is just to notice the weather. Our job isn't to hang on to the weather and let it uproot us and pull us down. That isn't our job. It's not our business. Death is beautiful. I have died so many times in my life. I have had so much death in my life. I've had so much grief in my life that I've learned to see such a poetry and such a beauty that it actually brings me to tears talking about it because it's the opportunity to reinvent yourself. And we have the opportunity to redraw ourselves and to course correct over and over and over and over. And pain is the eye-opener that a lot of people need to have that opportunity to be what I call broken open. You can only be broken if you're closed. If you're already open, you can't be broken. So every time life breaks you open, say thank you. I'm going to be broken open to the best of my ability. I'm going to grieve harder than anybody else has grieved. And there's beauty in it. And so every time there's a death in my life, I really look at that as this opportunity to just let myself grieve. Don't avoid it. You're just going to prolong the inevitable, and it's going to last longer. So just get to the grieving, get to the dying, get to the pain, experience it. Don't try and avoid it. See what you have to learn from it, what brought you there in your life, because I created it. I created most of these deaths in my life, a lot of them. And then it's also rebirth, the dark matter in the universe that's expanding. Our universe is ever expanding. I love physics. It's not nothing. Dark matter is the fabric of creation. Death is the fabric of creation. You're being pregnant with yourself. So every time you experience a death in your life, every time you experience pain in your life, it's the fertile ground from which you rebirth yourself. And to find poetry in it, and to spend time writing and going, okay, I'm dying and I'm in a lot of pain, and a lot of my brain and my emotional being's dedicated to that. But there's also a corner of my brain and my heart and my being that feels a glimmer of excitement, because on the horizon, there's a new me getting created. And who is that new me? What is that woman? Who is that person? Who is that being? What does she long for? And starting to ask myself those questions and getting very curious. So you're living two lives. Half of you has a foot in death, but another part of you has a foot in rebirth. And looking at that as an opportunity so that we don't stay addicted habitually to our pain, so we don't stay addicted habitually to our healing, but that we can get on to being whole. Mm-hmm. And when I went through this process with my mom, I was in my 30s. I realized I was not only broke, but I was in debt after making hundreds of millions of dollars. It was shocking and horrifying, and realizing
She was your manager and mismanaged your finances.
Well, I can say I mismanaged my life.
Okay.
I can say that.
Mismanagement happened.
Yeah. And not only that, but just the betrayal of who I thought my mom was, mm-hmm. the relationship that was a fantasy that I thought I was in. I was in a fantasy relationship, and I had to grieve the fantasy of the woman I thought that loved me. And then I had to grieve the realization of who the actual person was and come to terms and re-examine my life and see what was real, what wasn't. There's a lot of brainwashing. It was an incredible experience to go through. I took 2 years off from my career. I just stopped. And I went by the mirror one day, and I saw myself in my reflection, and I literally had just felt like somebody took my brain, and it was glass, and it just shattered into a million pieces, and I didn't know how to heal. And I didn't trust anybody to help. And so I was very by myself in this. And I remember this Joseph Campbell allegory of the golden statue. I don't know if you've ever read it, where there was a village, and they had a golden statue, and there was a warring tribe coming through. And so they covered the statue in mud so nobody would know its value. And it succeeded. The tribe came and left, and the statue remained. But people forgot the value of this golden statue because it remained covered in mud, and generations passed, and people just walked by this cruddy, muddy statue until a great rainstorm came, and it revealed that the statue was made of gold. For some reason, when I looked in the mirror, I went, oh, I'm not broken. I'm just covered in layers of shit and mud and hurt and shit that doesn't belong to me. But it's not who I am. And my job isn't to fix myself. My job is to do a very loving archaeological dig back to my true nature. The soul is not a teacup. It's not a chair. It can't be broken. It doesn't need super glue. We exist whole, and we exist perfectly at all times. And if I'm anxious, it's not because something's wrong with me. It's because something's right with me. And my soul is trying to communicate that I don't feel comfortable in my surroundings. And I need to tune into that. Nothing is wrong with me. And so I had to develop little exercises to start to say, when is a time that I felt whole and unbroken in my life? And it's fleeting, but there are times. I remember this one time laying in a meadow, and I felt like exactly who I am. My whole body hummed, I was alive. And so I just wrote down adjectives that described that girl, and I went, that's who I am. That's my essence. That's my wholeness. Anytime I'm not acting like that, I'm not being my authentic self. Anytime I believe a thought that isn't that, that's not my authentic self. And that helped me conduct and reprogram and de-brainwash a lot of the programming that I had of just saying, I pretended I had the gentlest, kindest, softest brush like you see archaeologists use, when they uncover bones, and just to do a very kind and very loving archaeological dig back to my whole self. And it helped me heal so much faster because I didn't have to get caught up in a lot of the psychodrama of healing and the places where we can get addicted to healing. But I could kind of get back to the business of going, this is where I'm less anxious in my body. This is me. Oh, this is where I'm more anxious in my body. That's not me. And with time, I was able to heal. And, in my 40s, I finally stopped having trauma in my life. Yay. And I was able to kind of take a deep exhale and realign and say, what is this next chapter of my life? I just went through a death. At 40, I not only went through the death of losing my marriage, but experiencing the trauma of my life that I never really let myself slow down enough to experience. I just was like, stand up, keep going, stand up, figure it out, stand up. And at 40, I kind of let myself experience all the trauma. It was a pretty intense experience. And I also got to say, okay, but I'm being reborn. Who's getting reborn? What do I want? And realizing what this next chapter in my life would be, and that it would be about advocating for wisdom, advocating that people have wisdom inside themselves, and forming the foundation and the organizations that I'm forming now.
Beautiful, beautiful. You just went into my last question, but I'll continue there. Yeah, thank you. So you've impacted millions and millions of people with your music. Me being one of them, who would just listen to your music over and over again, and I would feel something coming through there. I wouldn't know, if you asked me to put it into words, I wouldn't know how to put it into words. But when I would hear particularly certain songs, they would touch me, and I know they would touch so many of my friends too. They're like, that song from Jewel. And so no matter what was going on, you seemed to have moments where you could channel, I don't know if channeling is the right word, but you could access this speaking of truth and speaking of words that really touched a lot of us. And it feels like right now, how old are you? You said at 40 all this stuff happened.
I'm 42.
You're 42, so it's just 2 years ago.
Yeah.
It feels like there's this new chapter that's also wanting to show up in your life, or is appearing in your life, that is to touch people continually through music, but that's not the only means. And so I'm curious to, as best you can, post kind of the 40, all the things happening at 40, what do you see your life moving to, and what do you feel like Spirit or is guiding you in this next chapter? And maybe a little bit about Never Broken and how that has evolved.
Yeah, I feel like the mission I've been on hasn't changed. Why I wrote my music, the things that inspired me to write my music, looking for things that soothed and calmed me in intuitive ways and helping other people do that. I tried to do that through music. I wanted to help the world in some degree. I thought I would go into law, and then I realized pop culture has a tremendous ability to get a direct transfusion into people's bloodstreams like that. You can touch somebody's heart, and they have their own medicine cabinet, and they just open themselves up, and a song goes in, and they just find what needs healing, and they cry, and they don't always know why they cry, and it's just beautiful. And it doesn't have to be too much of an intellectual process. You bypass a lot of it. And so I feel so grateful that I've had music not only to heal me in my own life, but that it's been any kind of gift in anybody's life has been a tremendous blessing. But having the ability to affect my fan base culture was probably one of my favorite aspects of my life and my career. My fans call themselves the Everyday Angels. I was very intimidated and frightened to enter the public space until I realized I had the internet and I could talk to fans directly, and I could just say, hey, I'm flawed. Put me on no pedestal so I can be knocked off of no pedestal. And if you guys want to go on this journey with me, let's do this together. I'm trying to figure some things out. And my fans decided to go on this journey with me and to live the same values I was trying to live. And they began to look at each other, and I encouraged them to look at each other as an entire community and as an extended family. And what does that mean? What does it mean to show up for each other? If you're lonely, say you're lonely and find somebody in this community that has the same desires that you do. And they've just taken it to the next level. I mean, I have a fan that lost her partner and was grieving so hard, and with social media now we all stay so connected. And my fans set up a calendar of 2-day vigils where they all took 2 days off of work and they traveled to her city to stay with her in her home. And they cooked for her and stayed with her for 3 months.
Wow.
They did that. That's after 20 years of creating culture. But I didn't tell them to do that. They did that for themselves. Another fan of mine, her dad had a heart surgery. He was fine. He was in the hospital recovering. But all of the EDAs filled his room with balloons and flowers. He's not even a Jewel fan, but his daughter was a Jewel fan. And they decided to fill his room with flowers and balloons. When a fan of mine realized she couldn't be a ballerina, I was able on a blog to challenge her and say, what is it about dancing that you like? So dig below ballerina and go, what is the core essence under here? And find something else that allows you to do that and express it. Because that door closed, but there's another door that's going to open. And so they start to have these conversations, and I want to start doing that with corporate culture. I want to start doing it with more culture. And so I'm starting to work with Tony at Zappos, and because I want to look at large-scale companies where we can start to give them tools to become what I call a whole human. My life's work has been not being a good musician. If my greatest art is my art, I'm an asshole. Really. I want my life to be my greatest work of art. I want to look back on my life and go, I did something beautiful, and I tried. And art's going to be this much of it. Music. I've taken very seriously learning about nutrition, about physical wellness, now about parenting. What is it to be a whole parent? What is it to be soulful when you discipline a child? What is it to be a whole mindful person? What is it to be whole at work? What is it to be the same person at work as you are at home? What is it to show up as in a relationship as you are privately in your own personal internal world? How can I do it with every limb of my life? And so I want to be able to basically help create a whole human platform where we can give people information, education, and inspiration and equipment in every single category so that each of our limbs are equally toned so we can have harmony in every area of our life. So I'm looking at doing it in a couple ways. One is working with company culture by giving them tools. People to show up at work have to show up at home better. They have to show up in their relationships better. They have to show up for their children better. And they're going to come to work less distracted, more capable, more confident, with more energy and more ability to focus. And so I want to be able to give companies, politicians don't change culture. What's happening in politics is okay. It's going to be okay. Politicians don't rule the world. We do. We're the ones that lead to policy changing. So we have the power if we're willing to step into it. And as entrepreneurs, as company leaders, as owners of companies, as employees of companies, as consumers of companies, we influence and engage in culture. And so I'm really enjoying working with Zappos that's so dedicated to creating a culture of happiness, and I'm going to overlay a whole human component to be able to give employees the ability to look at each other the way my fan base does as a community. If you're going through a divorce, who in your community has gone through a divorce well? Mindfully, with soulfulness, with courage. And who can you mentor under? Who can help you when you're having a problem with your child at home? What resources do you have in these companies? They're massive. There's massive resources. There's people who are going through things that can mentor one another. And then how can we give those same tools to the consumer base? So how can the Zappos consumer, for instance, be able to have these same skill sets and look at each other as a culture, as a community that can reach out to? And what other large-scale companies can do that? I'm also looking at creating a whole human curriculum for public schools, and I'm also looking at doing a mindfulness children's show for 5-year-olds. And so those are the things I'm starting on. But I'm just starting. I don't know what all this looks like. I've been doing this very intuitively. I've made a living as a musician. That's still my main income source. But a few people have stepped forward to try and help me as an entrepreneur understand this as a new platform for myself. And I don't know where it leads. I don't honestly even know how to make money doing it. I just know it's the right thing to do. And so I'm following my intuition. And for somebody that's been traumatized and used and all kinds of things in life. If nothing comes of this next chapter of my life, if these new platforms don't get built, so be it. People have shown up for me in ways I can't even tell you how healing it is. Like, just how people have shown up for me to help me with this new chapter. If nothing happens, it's okay. The healing and the buoying of my spirit has just been incredible because the way people have showed up for me just to even attempt to help me doing it. So I'm still looking for help. I need designers. My website is literally run by one person. I'm starting to offer mindfulness tools where I get very specific because people have asked me, all right, specifically, how did you rewire? What are your specific tools you did when you were having panic attacks? So jewelneverbroken.com starts sharing those. I have 4 of them up right now. But I need designers. I need people that do programming. It's a completely homespun operation. It makes no money. But I think it's the right thing to do. So I have a booth outside. It's the Jewel Never Broken booth. If you have any skill sets or you want to have a passion for this type of mission, I'm going to start collecting people who are masters in each category, sharing the people that I've mentored under, so that we can start helping educate people, hopefully on a mass scale.
Great. And did you want to give out a particular email for people who want to
Oh,
offer support?
I have an email address that's written in front of me because I can't remember anything. It's support@jewelneverbroken.com. Support@jewelneverbroken.com. If you have any skill sets that might help me on my path, because this is the category I'm headed into. I just don't have all the puzzle pieces together. So,
but it feels
you guys are puzzle pieces.
It feels, and we're actually just about over time for lunch, but it feels like there's a way in which you want to teach. Like you want to teach in a more direct way than just having your music express something. You want to offer kind of tools that take the hardship that you've faced and the lessons that you've learned and have those be of use to whether it's companies or general public.
Yeah, I'm wanting to start to share tools in a much more specific, nitty-gritty way.
Yeah.
And I think music will continue to be a soundtrack.
Yeah.
It releases emotions and does things. It's pretty incredible what music can
It
do.
is.
But people need practical, simple tools that they can do in a life of overwhelm.
Yeah.
And they need information of what is technology doing to our children's brains and how do we deal with that as parents.
Yeah.
And I would look at myself as a curator much more than I would as a expert.
Yeah.
There's some things I have some expertise in. I'm happy to share what I've learned.
Right.
But there's other people spending lifetimes learning this, and it's stuff that we desperately need to know. And so I would look at myself as a curator to help other people have a platform to share what they know.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank
you
you
so much.
for your curation.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it. Thank you, guys. I'm humbled. Thank you.